I think it went very well. I was quite happy with the level of participation and interest from the audience, and the contribution from the speakers was excellent. We had a very diverse range of speakers who covered a lot of different areas in the broad topic of international research collaboration, and generated a really good workshop atmosphere. We talked about challenges in a number of different areas. I think one that was particularly interesting was around some of the people issues and the impact of culture and relationships between researchers and between collaborators, and how much of an impact that can have on the effectiveness of research collaboration. Also, I think another key point is about how do we effectively reuse existing infrastructure and resources that are available, and do so in a way that provides appropriate recognition to those who have put those tools in place. So creating systems that incentivize people to not only build these technologies and tools, but share them because they know they will get appropriate credit for the use of those facilities by others. So I think in terms of future directions, when we think about collaboration between Australia and EU, there are a number of different ideas that came out of the workshop today. One of them was about building on the concept of recognition for people in research, was to think about mechanisms for evaluating the strength of teams that are involved in a research initiative or project, and not just looking at the chief investigator, but looking at the human and information technology infrastructure that supports the project, and looking to award funding or initiatives to those groups who not only have the research expertise to drive it, but also have the underlying expertise in statistics and data management and coding and so forth, in order to bring the project to a successful conclusion. And I think a second area where there's a good opportunity that I guess kind of builds on common interests and shared interests between the two countries is about looking at the question of reproducible research and the ethics that go with ensuring that research is performed in a way that it can be validated and reproduced, and is therefore robust, and where there can be a high degree of confidence in the outcome of the research.
Tremendously important, these things. It's particularly important to Australia because Australia does such a small amount of research in the world. It needs to partner. So partnering is very important, and then you ask the question, who will you partner with? And there you look at, well, what's the characteristics of the partners that you're looking for? I think it's changed more gradually than that. Over the last 10 years, I think we fairly early on recognised there was an opportunity to collaborate, particularly with Europe. I think Europe and Australia have actually taken quite a similar approach to research infrastructure and e-research infrastructure, and that's actually made it quite possible. So we've, I think, been working together with Europeans on many different aspects. I think the multifaceted way in which we engage with Europe is a tremendous strength, really. We work in marine, we work in data, we work in many different fields, and in each case I think this separation of infrastructure and research actually makes it easier to work together. I think the intent of the funders are very similar, and that makes it helpful as well. More of the same, really. I think the opportunity of the European Open Science Cloud is very high, but it needs to be shaped as well. So It could be that we simply look for opportunities and we explore them and do useful things. If we're doing it really well, we'll be asking the deeper question of, well, how do we get the maximum value of the infrastructure investments of the two jurisdictions, and look at government-to-government relationship, funder-to-funder relationship. At the moment, we've got a lot of enthusiasm, and it's more a question of aligning that enthusiasm to deliver even more value. Well, in terms of the infrastructure overlap, I think everybody's talking about data and everybody's talking about AI, and a lot of people are talking about cloud. And in some ways, the ABC of AI, data and cloud are most powerful when they're actually thought about together. And for me, really thinking about those different elements where we complement each other. So for example, I think what is being intended in the European Open Science Cloud is ahead of the current intention in Australia, but on the other hand, I think we've got a good track record of actually delivering in that context, so marrying those things together. I think, for example, there's a huge opportunity in what is being described as data marketplaces, a place where you can come to meet researchers, education, industry, community, on sharing data and coming up with protocols that enable the potential power of AI to be harnessed, but will only be harnessed if there's very high quality data availability and data integration.
With data for biologists, generally the EU is very important. So one of the large global data repositories is based at the EBI at Kingston, and all molecular data that is produced globally has to be deposited into these database, but also a lot of researchers here in Australia need access to data in that database as well. So I think that as well as having access to data, there's also access to pipelines and tools that are globally sourced. So it's really, we live in a world where there's a large, there's a global ecosystem, and researchers that traditionally may not have required access or not have had access to large amounts of data are generating that, and that's due to technology changes in data capture. So I guess I would like to see a much more globally integrated research infrastructure. So that may entail some services or data being based in Australia or in Europe or indeed the US or in the cloud, commercial clouds as well. So I think it's a rapidly changing area and pretty interesting times. That's a good question. I think here, and this is I guess from an Australian perspective, we have a lot of the tools and infrastructure here, but they're still fairly fragmented. I think better integration of all of these tools both here, and that's at an institutional level, at a state level and a national level, with resources at an international level. That's the challenge, just integrating all of these.
eResearch is important because eResearch is the segue to transform the data as a platform for collaboration in research. It also enables new way of approaching research via the basically exploring the data rather than actually the classic way of working around a fixed hypothesis. Well, although Australia is far from everywhere else, that's the usual assumption, we have, the record shows we have a significant number of joint publications with all other countries. So in a way, although we geographically far from Europe and US and some other part of Asia, but in practice, when it gets to research, we work with so many universities. Data here plays an important role because a lot of the data-driven projects that requires access to that data to make the research happens, and that's another key factor that the eResearch is basically an enabler that we need to have it in place so we can actually maintain and actually grow these collaborations. So Europe and Australia have a close ties in different politics and trade agreements and in overall about the cultural engagement. When it gets to research, Europe is also have a lot of partnership between different universities when it gets from the universities in UK or Germany or Switzerland that they work with universities in Australia. A lot of these projects are separately funded and are even governed separately through different engagements. However, it will be good in future we can have a more closer collaboration in this space when we can have actually joint funded projects and joint collaborative efforts when these countries actually not only align small projects but also larger, more nationally significant projects together. As we just discussed, the clear path for joint funding is one of the things that's missing at the moment. There is not, if you are a researcher work on a project that project has ties to a university in Barcelona, it's not that quite easy to actually find a funding model that supports that activity across two different jurisdictions. The other thing that's missing, which part of it comes from the technology, but that's going to go away as we are developing through the ICT infrastructures, is the ability to actually work together across these boundaries. And that is one of the things that both from the funding, both European Commission has investment in that space and Australia, and I think we are closing the gap, but there are much more to be desired in that space.
A large part of my work has been involved in with the climate community. I first got involved in developing eResearch infrastructure about 5 years ago when I worked at the Bureau of Meteorology. And in that work, we were developing what's called the Climate and Weather Science Lab, which has brought together a lot of international networks with the Earth System Grid Federation and building new capabilities to enable the Australian research community to all work together on a common platform. Yes, data management plans are extremely important to the work that we do. At NCI, we manage a large house of a repository of data collections, not just in climate and weather, but also geophysics, a lot of satellite Earth observations data. And part of the reason we're a repository is because of the fact that we're a high performance computing facility as well. And therefore, the reason for having these data sets co-located with high performance compute is that it means that people can actually get access to that data more easily in situ, and importantly that it's managed to be suitable for that application. So data management plans become important because they tell us not just what data we have, but the purpose of the data, who can access it, under what circumstances. So it's a really important issue for us to have up-to-date data management plans, and that we also capture all the information that we need to enable users to find that data as well. In terms of the data management plans and even the metadata around data catalogues, it's an ongoing, we'll always be learning to improve that, to make it more suitable. We're always looking at what are the commonalities across the research communities, because we're aiming towards multidisciplinary research, transdisciplinary data. What we need to understand is what's the commonality that can be used across different communities, and then what is the things that need to be managed specific to each community. So we work with international organisations, and we look at the standards and we see how we can apply them to what the data collections that we have at NCI, and we look and work with the owners of that data to see what it is that we can do to make it apply for them and their community as well as across communities.
eResearch offers a lot of opportunities to broadly speaking, social scientists, business and innovation researchers. I think at this stage maybe we're missing a bit of awareness about what it can really offer and to what extent it can support excellence in research, but also the delivery of impactful research. Yes, I've got a couple of large-scale and European-funded projects at the moment. The way it works well is that obviously it allows cooperation in selected research areas which touch upon eResearch or leverage on the skills and capabilities that eResearch can offer. What works well is obviously the opportunity to reach to universities across the globe and through Europe, because there's a lot of other partners also coming from non-EU countries and associate members. What doesn't work so well is probably the lack of funding from the European Commission for Australian-based research, and also from the perspective of Australian funding agencies. I think in the future it would be interesting to have schemes that actually allow twinning and match funding, and also probably some schemes that foster and recognize that collaboration using criteria that would be commonly agreed between the funding institutions in Europe and in Australia. What I'd like to see the grand challenges and the grand societal challenges being addressed, like food security or climate change, or which might be more of a politically sensible issue, but still I'd like to see grand challenges being addressed. I wouldn't like to see research focusing very much on specific technologies in themselves. The technology should be there to actually solve a problem that is a real problem.